everyone, it's Jennifer from Flux. In this video, I'm going to show you how to crochet these adorable little pumpkin throw pillows. Now, I made mine as a throw pillow, but you can really just set them on a shelf or a table. They look equally cute. These are made with some plushy blanket yarn, so they're chunky and really quick to stitch up. We're going to learn how to make the main part of the pumpkin, how to create these divots and seam it up, how to create the stem, which is also crocheted, and we're going to add some burlap accents or whatever you have on hand, really. The finished pumpkin has about a 25-inch circumference and is about 6 inches tall from the surface that it sits on to the top of the stem. Now, that being said, and I mentioned this later in the video, depending on the yarn you use, how much filling you put into your pumpkin, how tall you make your stem, etc., may change your dimensions slightly. And every pumpkin has its own kind of look. Now you can see my pumpkins look similar, but one is a little bit shorter because of the way I stuffed it. One is a little bit taller. So I thought that was really neat because they kind of look like real pumpkins anyway when they're like that. So your dimensions may vary slightly, but they are pumpkins, and just like real pumpkins, they are all different sizes. So those are the rough dimensions though that I got. For this project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle. A ruler or tape measure is super helpful to kind of measure as you go along. You're also going to need an 8mm L crochet hook. Now we're going to be using that for both the main body part of the pumpkin and also the top stem part of the pumpkin as well. So just one hook for all the yarns we'll be using. Now the top, when we make our stem at the end, as an option, I'm going to tie some burlap ribbon around the stem of my pumpkin, just to give it a little bit of texture and interest and give it a little rustic feel. I have some burlap ribbon here, and it is wired, and wired ribbon gives you a little bit more control of how it looks when it's done. I also grabbed some hemp twine, and this is kind of rustic, and you know how pumpkins have those like curly cues? I was going to kind of mimic that. So if you have some ribbon or twine or raffia or anything to tie around the stem to give it some texture, you know, check out what you have in your stash. I also think some ribbon would be beautiful, maybe some fall plaid or something like that. So just check out, see what you have. We're going to stuff our pumpkins. Now I have a big bag here of polyfill. Now you can get this at the craft store, and I just bought like a big bag of it. This is a 16-ounce bag, and I'm going to make 2 pillows, and this is enough for 2 pillows. And let's talk about the yarn. Now for the main part of the pumpkin, there's 2 really great yarns you can use. One is the Bernat blanket, which I've used in the past if you've made the living room throw, or the family room throw actually. And then the other one is Red Heart Sweet Home if you made the corner to corner silver linings blanket. These are 2 wonderful fluffy kind of cuddly yarns that would be perfect for our pumpkins. They're similar weight, not exactly the same weight, but the L hook, the 8mm hook, will work beautifully for either one. Now also, if you want to mimic, this is the antique white. This is gonna I'm going to make like a white cream color pumpkin that you see at the farm stands right now. That's kind of, I think they're called ghost pumpkins, but I wanted one of those. And then this is the steel colorway. It's a nice charcoal gray. I thought that would give us some really pretty modern looking pumpkin throw pillows. And then for the stem, we're going to be crocheting a stem, and I wanted a dark brown of a similar weight. This is the Super Saver Chunky yarn, and I'm going to be using the coffee for the stem. Now you don't have to do a brown stem. You could make a cream colored pumpkin with a gray stem or vice versa. It's really up to you and what works for your own home decor. But if you recognize this is from our 12 weeks of gifting. I just kind of grabbed this from that pile. So check out that series as well. But this is some of the yarn from that, and we're going to learn how to make the stem together as well. So let's get started with our pumpkin. Okay, we're going to begin the pumpkin part first. Later we're going to learn how to do the stem and then assemble everything, okay? So what we want to do, I'm going to make the gray one along with you so that you can really see the yarn. The other pumpkin is the cream color, and it's a little bit harder to see the white, but we'll see everything at the end all put together. So grab some of your yarn, whatever color you're using. It doesn't have to be pumpkins as decor around the house. Don't really need to be orange, although classic orange is really nice, but it is fun to try them in different modern colors. So what we want to do first is put a slip knot on our hook. Wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop. Bring the yarn behind that loop, reach in with your hook, bring up a loop and tighten. Next, we're going to chain 40, okay? So to make a chain, just wrap the yarn around the hook and pull it through, okay? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, and 40. Okay, so here is our starting chain. It's pretty long, and you don't want to make it too tight. If you find your chain is too tight, we do need to go back into these chains and work. Just go up a hook size for the starting chain only part, and then you can go back down to this 8mm L hook. So for row 1, we're going to work a half double crochet in the third chain from the hook. So let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see here. So this loop here does not count, but we're going to count 1, 2, 3 chains and work a half double crochet into that third chain from the hook. So to make a half double crochet, wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that third chain from the hook, bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops, and that's it. The next thing we're going to do is work a half double crochet in every chain across. Okay, so we're going to half double crochet in the next chain, half double crochet in the next chain, and so forth. Okay, all the way across. And this yarn is very squishy and plushy. It's going to make a really nice little pumpkin. Okay, so I'm going to work my half double crochets across, and then we will rejoin towards the end of row 1, and I'll show you how to transition onto row 2 and what we need to do for row 2 as well. Okay, so keep working your half double crochets all the way across. Just working those last couple of half double crochets rather in the last couple of chains, and there's the very last chain here. Okay, so this is what row 1 should look like. It's just going to be a long strip of stitches here. So row 2, now row 2 is the row you're going to be repeating over and over for the rest of the pumpkin. So we're going to do a chain 2, 1, 2, and turn our work. So we're going to work a half double crochet into that first stitch and in every stitch across, okay? So I'm just going to work my half double crochets, and then we'll rejoin towards the end of the row. Same stitch, we're just working into the stitches now and not into the chains. And those are those little loops at the top of each of these half double crochets from the previous row. Okay, so just work your half double crochets all the way across, and we'll rejoin in just a moment. All right, coming up to the end of row 2. And then we're just going to work a half double crochet into the top of that turning chain at the end of the row as well. Okay, so we have a nice little strip here. So what we want to do, now this is going to be about, give or take of your tension. This strip here that we have is going to be about 21 inches wide. Now keep repeating row 2 over and over and over until your rectangle is about 10 inches tall, okay? So keep repeating row 2, and then when we return, what we're going to do is learn how to bring our strip around to make a circle, and we're going to learn how to cinch it up on the top, cinch it up on the bottom, stuff it, and then create those nice little divots with some yarn, okay? So stay tuned. We're going to keep repeating row 2 of our little strip until it's about 10 inches tall. Just working that last half double crochet, the topmost chain of our turning chain. And now our piece is complete. So as you can see, if I zoom out a little bit, we have a rectangle, okay? It's about 10 inches tall, like I mentioned before. So what we need to do now is fasten off. Now I'm going to do a nice long tail because we're going to use this tail to do a little bit of seaming next. The next part of our pumpkin and we can scoot this out of the way for now, is that we're going to, well, let's go ahead and fasten off. So wrap the yarn around the hook and pull it all the way through. Now I did a long tail, so I have a little bit of pulling to do. But the next thing we want to do is put this pumpkin together and stuff it. So what we've done so far is created this little tube basically, and what we're going to do is seam the edge of it like this, and then we're going to cinch the bottom and cinch the top. Okay, so this tail is a little small, but we don't need to weave it in because we can tuck it into the inside of the pumpkin. But what we need to do now is grab a tapestry needle so we can seam this part first. Now before you begin, I wanted to mention the fabric that we've created. The half double crochets almost give it like a herringbone look, but you want to pick the side that you like the best. It is reversible, so really it doesn't matter, but you can really, at this time, make a decision about that. So we want to bring the two ends together and grab our tail. Now I made this really, really long because what we're going to do is seam this up and also cinch one of the ends, okay? So what you want to do is sort of hold this like a sandwich, like so, and you want to go into both layers. So make sure you're going into 2 loops, and I can zoom in and show you that. See how I have 2 loops on that one layer? And then we go into the other layer, it's also going to be 2 loops on that, okay? So what we want to do is just go ahead and whip stitch. Now if you're not familiar with the whip stitch, it's a very simple, kind of straightforward seam. We're just going in both layers. It creates a spiral through your work. It's pretty invisible, so which is important when you're seaming. You want it to be invisible unless you're doing a design element, but normally we want our seams to not be showy. So we're just going to seam it all the way across here. Okay, just working that last little seam at the top here. Alright, so now we have a tube. It almost looks like a narrow cowl. Okay, so we're at the end here, and what we want to do next is we're going to cinch up this end of our pumpkin. So all we want to do, and this tail, remember I mentioned before, you can just kind of throw that off to the side. We're not even going to worry about that. But what we want to do now is go along the top edge and do a running stitch. Okay, all a running stitch is in and out, in and out, in and out. Okay, like a very simple seam around, and every so often you can sort of pull it through. You don't want to pull it too tight yet because we sort of want to have control over how it cinches. We don't want it to be too bulky on one side or what have you. So you just want to get that stitch in there, but we're going to sort of pull it tight in a moment, okay? Alright, so we're just going to continue around with our running stitch all the way around this top edge of this pumpkin here. And I'm really loving the idea of a charcoal pumpkin hanging out in my house. And I can't wait to display them. The other thing that's really cool about these pumpkins, if you have furniture that you don't want to get scratched up, like if you have like a wood table or something, a lot of times when we put ceramic things, you want to put like little felt pads on there so you don't scratch up your surfaces. But with these, because they're plushy and soft, you could set them out on any piece of furniture and it'll be just fine. I'm going to use mine as throw pillows, so they'll be extra fun on a sofa or a chair. Okay, so we're back to where we started. So what we want to do now I still have a nice long tail, and that's going to be helpful in just a moment. So what we need to do now is, now it almost is starting to look like a hat. We want to cinch up the bottom of our pumpkin. Okay, so this is going to be the bottom of our pumpkin. Now this tail will come in handy in just a moment. You want to make sure that you're going to get a nice cinch too. You don't want it to be gaping open. Now be very careful, because if you pull your yarn too tight, it can snap off. And then you sort of have to backtrack a little bit and redo it. So you pull it there's a balancing act. You need to pull it pretty firmly, but you don't want to pull it so tightly that it snaps. Okay, so now this is the inside of our pumpkin. So what we want to do next is, now we can just, at this point, we can snip this off. But you can keep this threaded for just a moment. So what we're going to do now is turn our pumpkin right side out. Okay, now you can see the bottom. And now it looks like a basket. So it's taking on all these forms. Okay, and you can see the tails down in there. Just leave them, no biggie. Okay, the next thing we need to do is cinch up the top. Now we also do not want to, I want to start back here at the seam like I did before so it kind of matches. And so if you can see your seam, now mine's pretty invisible, but I want to make that the back of my pumpkin. I want to start at the seam though so I can start and finish there. So the next thing we're going to do is the same thing. We're just going to do a nice little running stitch all along the top edge, and we can do this pretty quickly with our chunky yarn here. And every so often you might need to pull it through, but we don't want to cinch it shut yet. You want to keep it pretty open like I'm doing here. And make sure you have a tail at the other end so you can tie it to this end. But we're going to stuff it next, so you want lots and lots of space to stuff your pumpkin, okay? Now I'm going to be using fiber fill for mine, but I also, if you have some yarn scraps laying around, whenever you trim your yarn, sometimes I'll throw mine into a bag and save it. You can use yarn scraps, you could use fabric scraps. If you're in a pinch, you could even use cotton balls or, you know, balled up fabric or what have you. So you can really, oh, we're back at the beginning. You can really be sustainable about this and reuse and repurpose some things as well. Now I happen to already have the fiber fill, so, you know, I'm just also using stuff I have. Okay, so we're not going to tie this yet because we need to stuff the inside. So I'm going to grab my fiber fill and then we're going to work on that next. Alright, so it's time to stuff this pumpkin. Again, you know, feel free to use up different things that you have around that you may use. Now, as you can see, I have different fiber fill from different projects. They're all kind of collected in this bag. But we're going to go ahead and just stuff it right in there. Apologies for the plasticky crinkle sounds. I know that drives some people crazy. That plasticky bag sound. Alright, so we're just gonna, we don't want to overstuff it, but we do want it to be nice and firm. Okay, you want it to be, again, this is another balancing act. And if you notice I'm sort of pulling it open before I stuff, we don't want clumps of it because it'll make your pillow look lumpy. You want it to be sort of like this fill to be sort of opened up. Okay, and if you do this in one kind of confined location, you can sort of keep the mess down to a minimum. It surprisingly doesn't leave crumbs, so I don't really know how, but because it seems like it would be much messier than it's acting right now. So okay, so I've filled up my pumpkin and we want to sort of shape it up and make sure. Now, at this point, we can sort of draw the top in, almost as like a little belt in the front here. We can draw this in. Again, be very careful not to snap your yarn. It happens. Okay, so as you draw up your pumpkin, you may notice that it's starting to get those like pumpkin shapes, those like divots that you see in pumpkins, and you can use those as a guideline for what we're about to do next. Okay, so what we want to do next is just go ahead and take your tails and tie it together. Okay, we want to pull that in. Now, if you have a little hole at the top like I do, we're going to be putting our stem there, so I wouldn't worry too much, but I wouldn't make it any more open than that. Okay, you can sort of see the hole, but it's pretty camouflage. Okay, so the shorter tail, this is what I love about these pieces that you stuff like this. You can just tuck that right into your pumpkin, and that's it. Now let's get our fiber fill out of the way here. And what we're going to do now is sort of shape our pumpkin. You know, we want it to have a good shape to it. And at this time you want to make sure that it's not overstuffed or understuffed. Now this opening that we have, you can still get a little bit more fill in there if you need to. So the next thing we need to do is create those little lines. Now let me grab my other pumpkin just to show you the difference of what we have so far. This is our finished pumpkin, and as you can see, I've taken some yarn and created some indentations with the yarn. What we have now sort of looks like a kind of like a deflated basketball. So what we need to do is take our tail and create some of that characteristic pumpkin shape. Okay? Now, I will say, as a side note, every pumpkin is going to look different because now this is Bernat Blanket, this is Sweet Home, so I'm already using two different yarns. I didn't measure or weigh the amount of fiber fill that went into each one, so they may have slightly different amounts of fiber fill. And with the amount of hand seaming and creating these divots, every pumpkin's going to have its own unique look. So just keep that in mind as you work your pumpkin. Now, when we cinched, remember I was saying it created sort of our guidelines? Now you can sort of manipulate those, sort of bend them at your will, but you can sort of use them as guidelines if you need to. So what we're going to do is sort of lay the yarn in between and go around, and then you can always reposition these two, but we're going to go through the bottom of our pumpkin, and then you need to squash your pumpkin. Like, see how I'm squishing it like this in order to help the needle come back up on the other end. Okay? And then what you're going to do, now again, don't pull too hard, but you need to give it a firm tug. When you pull it in, there you go. Now you have your pumpkin shape, okay? Now this part can be a little tricky because you have to hold it tight, wrap it around the next little section there. Think of it like an orange, like if you're have like orange segments. Now remember, squish it in and pull it through, okay? So we're going to try to establish some of these segments. And if they're not perfectly the same distance apart all the way around, you can sort of reposition some of this stuff later, okay? So we're going to wrap it around. If you notice my tail's getting pretty short, we're going to have to create a new tail soon. Okay, we're going to go back through and come back up. Squish it in if you need to help that needle come through. And then pull it up and pull it nice and tight, okay? Now, I'm going to need a new piece of yarn because I don't think I have quite enough. So go ahead and, if you're running out of yarn like I am, go ahead and sort of put a little stitch in there. Go into the pumpkin, bring it up. It can be a little bit fiddly. And pull that needle through. Now I'm still holding this so it stays nice and tight here. And I'm going to send it through that loop that I'm holding with my finger and just pull it really, really tight without breaking the yarn. I know it's tough to not break the yarn and create the tightness that you need. It can be a little bit tricky. Okay, so as you can see, here's the smooth side. Here's the pumpkin-y side, okay? For lack of a better term. So I'm going to cut a new piece of yarn because I ran out of length here. And this should be enough to get us around. We're just going to leave him alone for right now. You can, remember earlier we sort of tucked it into the center, so you could even tuck that in right now if you like, okay? So just try to remember what the top and the bottom is, and as you can see, it's sort of crooked right now too because of the stitches that we've put into this. So I'm just going to come up under one of these stitches, pull it almost all the way through, leave a tail, and just tie it right on like this. And that way we can keep going with our divots that we're creating, okay? This tail, tuck that right in. Don't even worry about it. All right, so let's keep going. We're going to go around and create more segments in our pumpkin. So go down through that middle, squish your pumpkin in to get that needle through. It gets a little easier after the first couple of stitches. And then we're going to give it a nice tug, and it creates another segment. I have to say, making pumpkins is just one of the most fun things ever. This has really been a fun project. Okay, now another thing you can do is before you pull it all the way through, sort of line it up how you want it to go. Give it a nice tug, okay? Go around, create another segment. We are in the home stretch. We're almost done with our segments here. Bring it back up. Give it a nice tug. Now if you have a little flat spot like this, you can just kind of dig your finger in there and fluff it back up, okay? Now we just need one more segment. We're just going to wrap it around, come up through the pumpkin, position it before you pull it tight. I'm going to just line it up a little bit better and then pull, 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 pull. A little scary because I don't want to break my yarn, but all right, now we're back at the beginning and we're just going to do the same thing we did before. Just kind of tuck it up under one of those stitches. Might take a little muscle power. Now don't worry if you're squashing stuff. We can always fluff things back up in a minute. Okay, now put a nice strong knot in there, and just for good measure, I'm going to just do that once more, just so my pumpkin stays put. Okay, give it a nice tug. Now pull that out of your needle and just tuck it right in that center hole. Okay, now fluff your pumpkin up. It looks so cool. I just love it. Okay, and our pumpkin is all set. Now, like I said before, if we grab our other pumpkin, you can see they have a little bit of a different, let me just slide this over so you can see, but they have a little bit of a different, this one's a little bit taller, this one's a little bit like shorter and more defined segments, so they're all going to have a little bit of a different feel. Let's move on to our stem next. We're going to learn how to make the stem and then put it all together. The stem part of our pumpkin is super easy. What we're going to do is put a slip knot on our hook, just like that, and then what we're going to do is chain 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. The next thing we're going to do is in the second chain from the hook, this loop here does not count. We're going to count 2 chains in, 1, 2, and work a single crochet. So insert the hook into that chain, bring up a loop. You'll have 2 loops on your hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through both loops. Next, we're going to work a single crochet in every chain across. So go ahead and do that. This is only just a few rows, and what's going to give it the nice sturdiness is we're going to make this little rectangle, and then we're going to fold it in half, seam it, and stuff it. And I'm going to walk you through this whole stem construction. Okay, so we're just working a single crochet in each chain across, okay? Just like that. So it should look kind of like this. And then what we're going to do is chain 1 and turn our work, and then work a single crochet in that very first stitch and in every stitch across. So just go ahead and work single crochets across in every stitch. Now, see this tail? We're going to leave that alone because we're going to use that tail later to do some of our seaming and later sew it onto our pumpkin. Okay, so just work it in that every stitch across, and then that turning chain, that chain 1 and turn that we did, you're going to do that as well. Okay, now you're just going to repeat that row one more time. So chain 1, turn, work your single crochets all the way across. Okay, now this is the extent of our stem. Just these couple of rows that we're going to do. And let me just grab my yarn here, it's flying around. Okay, just get all of those single crochets in there. And then what we're going to do is grab your scissors and cut a nice long tail. I would say at least 12 inches on that. and then wrap the yarn around the hook and pull it all the way through. Okay, so now we have this rectangle, and I just want to show you before we continue. Let's give this a quick measure just so we can all be on the same page here. So your rectangle should be about 4.5 inches long and about, I would say, 1.5 inches wide. Okay, so next what you're going to do, there's no right or wrong side of this. Fold your rectangle in half so it looks like that. And then what you can do is grab your tapestry needle and choose the longer tail. Well, actually it doesn't matter because we're going to use these to seam up each side. Okay, so we're just going to sandwich that. So remember, we folded it down and then sandwich it up the sides, and you're just going to use a whip stitch. Now all a whip stitch is a spiral. You want to go through both layers of your little sandwich here, and you want to go through both stitches. So that's going to entail, if you can see here, there's 2 loops on one layer and then 2 loops on the other layer. Okay, just a couple of quick stitches up the side here, just like that, and then get that very last one in. And then before you pull it all the way through, send your needle through and give it a tug. This is going to be the inside, so it doesn't have to be completely perfect. Okay, then you can kind of let that drop. Then what we're going to do is do the same thing on the other side. Now this tail's a little bit shorter, but I think we should have plenty to get us through here. So just work your whip stitch all the way up the side of your stem, just like that, and then fasten it off with a knot. Now pick which one is longer. Now, I deliberately cut one pretty long. And then what we're going to do, so this is our stem. It should be sort of, it's kind of like a pouch right now. You're going to sort of weave the end back down to the bottom, like that. So hold that long tail sort of aside right now. Now turn your stem right side out, okay? And you can take this other tail and just tuck it right in there. No need to weave it in. We're going to use this tail now to sew the stem onto our pumpkin. But first, before we continue, we need to grab a little bit of our fiber fill. Now, you don't want to stuff it too much because it'll show through. When you're using really dark yarn like this, you definitely don't want to do too much fill, just enough to give it a little bit of volume. But if we overstuff it, it'll start to pull these stitches open and you can see the fiber fill showing through. So I even like to give it a little squeeze. That'll give it some more, a little bit of compactness. And now our stem is ready to go onto our pumpkin. So next we're going to put everything together. So here is our stem, and I'm also going to grab our burlap because I'm going to do some burlap like this one. Earlier in the video I shared, now I keep this in a Ziploc bag because it gets everywhere. You can also use, I have some hemp twine that makes those fun curlicues, but when I did the burlap on this one, I just really loved it just by itself, all by itself. Okay, so here is our stem, and remember we left that long tail to seam it on. So grab your needle, and you just want to position it where you want it to go, okay? So it just kind of sits right in the center there. And again, you might need to kind of fold this back a little bit just to sort of get it in there, and you can always go back in and kind of floof it up later. Okay, so go in there. And we're going to pick up a stitch from our bottom of our stem and a stitch from our pumpkin. Now it's kind of set down in there, so you kind of got to sort of dig with your needle a little bit. You're just going to put that right on there. Now, if it doesn't look completely beautiful and perfect when you seam this on, no worries, because you can tie burlap onto the stem like I did, burlap ribbon or regular ribbon or the twine or raffia. Looks pretty around fallish stuff. So, you know, as long as it's secure, I wouldn't be super nitpicky if you plan on tying something around your stem like I'm doing. That's kind of the reason why I did it, but I also love the texture. I love mixed textures like that. It looks really pretty. Okay, so we're just coming around here. Okay, put the last stitch in there, and then we're just going to pick up one more loop like that, and then leave a loop because you want to send your needle through that loop just to knot it, okay? We're going to shape everything up in just a moment. It looks pretty good though, I gotta say. Sometimes when you seam things, it just really distorts them and you have to go back and shape them back up. As for our tail, you can weave that in and just send it right through the center of your stem like that, and then through the pumpkin. Come back out on the bottom. Give it a tug and really scoot your scissors down as far as you can. Be careful not to snip anything you're not supposed to. And then it just, see how it just sort of disappears? Okay, now our stem, our pumpkin is really a nice shape. We want to sort of shape up our stem like this, and it looks so cute. I just love these little pumpkins. Okay, let's cut a piece of ribbon last. Now, you don't have to cut it perfectly right now, because what we're going to do, now I probably should have a bigger pair of scissors, but what we're going to do is cut it a little bit bigger, and then we'll sort of trim it later, okay? Now, if you notice, I'm giving it a nice twist here, and I'm going to pre-tie it. Now, I'm saying all this because I've done this with this one, and I tried to tie it on, and see how I have like a nice kind of casual looking knot? I tried to tie it on, and it looked really like not that great. So I'm going to pre-tie it. So if you have a really stiff ribbon like this burlap ribbon, you might want to do a pre-tie, and then you have a little bit more control over how it looks. See how I'm able to like get that knot nice and smooth? And then we want to create a loop and just sort of slide it onto our pumpkin. Now if you have ribbon that's not stiff like this, don't even worry about it, but the pre-tie helped me out quite a bit, and I got, now mine's wired, so I can kind of shape it however I want. And actually, let me grab I have a little bit bigger pair of scissors here. My big scissors ran off. Does that ever happen with you? Do you ever lose your scissors when you need them most? Okay, so what I did was, if you look at this one, I cut it at an angle towards the stem, okay? So you can see that. So I'm going to do the same thing. Start at the bottom and kind of angle it upward. Now when you do a fresh cut, you might need to sort of loosen it up a little bit so it doesn't look so like hard edged. And then we're going to cut the other side. Just give it a little trim. Shape everything up, get that stem out of there so it's sticking up enough. And that's it. Now this is a little bit pointy. I'm going to doctor that up a little bit. Okay. Now burlap can be super duper messy, just as a side note. This leaves a lot of little crumbs, and in addition, this fuzzy yarn seems to attract all the fuzz. So I hope you have a little bit of time to make a pumpkin, because these were so much fun to make. So that is how you crochet the modern pumpkin throw pillows. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again!